Do you ever wonder that you might be becoming a bit more forgetful? Do you experience brain fog? Or do you simply want to optimize your cognitive function? Today's episode of The Wellness Nurse will provide you with practical strategies to improve your brain function and, hopefully, to prevent dementia. Dr. Helena Popovic is a GP and a leading authority on brain health and dementia prevention with over 30 years of experience, and has dedicated her career to empowering individuals to unlock their cognitive potential and lead vibrant, fulfilling lives. Helena has written 3 best-selling books on how to boost our brain, reduce our risk of dementia, and live longer, stronger, healthier, and happier. She is an international speaker and has just arrived back in Australia after presenting at the Alzheimer Europe Conference in Geneva, Switzerland. I have invited her to update us on the latest in brain health and dementia prevention. We will also dive deep into the fascinating world of neuroplasticity and explore practical strategies you can implement today to enhance your brain health. We'll be tackling common misconceptions about brain health, discussing the powerful connection between nutrition and cognition, and uncovering actionable tips for improving sleep quality and incorporating exercise into your routine that will not only be good for your body, but be sensational for your brain. Welcome to this episode of the Wellness Nurse podcast. I'm your host, Ros Lindsay, and I'm thrilled to welcome the remarkable Dr. Helena Popovic in the studio today. Hello, Helena.
Hello, Ros. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Firstly, Geneva in autumn. What a beautiful time to be in Switzerland. Would you share some of the highlights and updates from your time at the Alzheimer Europe Conference?
Well, the biggest takeaway was just because something doesn't come in a pill doesn't mean it isn't powerful. We have to expand our definition of what constitutes medicine, because sleep, stress management, social support, mental stimulation, food, exercise, even music and art are more powerful than any prescription pills when it comes to improving and even reversing Alzheimer's and other dementias. And I just want to make sure that everyone listening is aware of the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's. Dementia is an umbrella term for over 100 different diseases of the brain, all of which involve deterioration in one or more brain functions. And that will include memory, planning, decision-making, speech, comprehension, judgment, navigation. Dementias also produce personality changes. Apathy is a red flag. Somebody that used to be enthusiastic about things suddenly loses interest, and mood dysregulation. So the word dementia is similar to the word cancer in that there are many different types with overlapping symptoms. And Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia, and that's why we hear the most about it. It accounts for about 70% of cases. The second most common form of dementia is vascular dementia. It accounts for 15% of cases. Another one people will have heard of is frontotemporal dementias, which is what Bruce Willis has been diagnosed with. And these usually occur before the age of 65 and therefore referred to as early onset dementias. Anything occurring before the age of 60 to 65 is considered a younger onset dementia. And the last one I'll mention is Lewy body dementia, which is often but not always associated with Parkinson's disease. And I won't list the other 96 dementias. I just wanted to make the point that dementia is a really broad term, and there are lots of different types that sit underneath that. And what emerged from the Alzheimer Europe Conference in Geneva, and also the Alzheimer's Disease International Conference in Krakow in Poland in April this year, where I also presented, is that doctors have to start seriously prescribing lifestyle interventions like physical exercise, like spending time in nature, like having conversations with your next door neighbour or greengrocer. They have to be considered as medicine because they are. Loneliness is as damaging as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Friendly, daily social interactions are not a nice to have. They're a must have for good mental and physical health. And it's a big gap in our medical training that we're not taught to regard non-pharmaceutical and non-surgical options as medicine. And it's a big disservice to our patients. So that was a very long, answer to the biggest takeaway, but I think it's a really critical one.
No, it's a perfect explanation, because I'm thinking as a GP, the model that you were taught is often about prescription medicine, finding the answer or the solution in a medication So it's a completely new way of prescribing. And I know some Australian GPs are starting to prescribe lifestyle medicine separately to accompany medication and then to reduce medication. But is that still an evolving thing for a lot of
Very
GPs?
much so.
Yeah.
Very much so. And the system is set up to not allow enough time to do a deep dive into lifestyle medicine. And also a lot of patients expect a quick fix. It's like, no, I don't have time to exercise and to take up all and to change my diet. And just give me something so I can get back to work. So we've created a system that doesn't foster using lifestyle as medicine, but we really need to if we want to make a headway on most of the chronic diseases we're now suffering.
I think it's really fascinating that you also highlight that patients want a quick fix. And what I'm learning is that there are really no quick fixes when it comes to health and longevity. It's bit by bit. It's starting small. It's getting those small wins,
Yes.
building on those wins. And eventually you start to embody the person that you are trying to become, which is a healthy person who is minimizing the risks of chronic disease.
Yes.
Yes, but it takes time.
Yeah.
It does. So your journey in brain health and dementia prevention is fascinating. What was the pivotal moment that set you on this path, and how has your perspective changed over the years?
Well, a pivotal moment happened 14 years ago, shortly after my mother passed away with lung cancer. I happened to find a box of the medication rivastigmine in the butter compartment of my parents' fridge. Rivastigmine, brand names Exelon and Donezepil, it's what's known as a choline esterase inhibitor. It's a drug that reduces the breakdown of the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, which is very low in people with Alzheimer's. And it's sometimes prescribed in the early stages of the disease to really just temporarily slow the worsening of symptoms. And I didn't know anyone who had Alzheimer's, so I asked my father who the patches were for, and he says to me, "Your mother said they were good for my memory, so I stick one on every night. I don't know that they do much, but as long as I took them, happy wife, peaceful life." And that was how I first learned that Dad had been diagnosed with dementia. I'd been living in Brisbane and my parents were living in Sydney, and I only moved back to care for Mum after she'd been diagnosed with lung cancer. And I assumed that Dad's confusion, withdrawal, forgetfulness, depression, well, he was obviously grieving at losing Mum. But when I tracked down Dad's GP after finding the medication, he confirmed that no, actually, your father has been diagnosed with mixed Alzheimer's and vascular dementia. And it turns out that such was the stigma around dementia in my Serbian family of origin that my parents hadn't told anybody, not even their only child, their devoted daughter, who also happened to be a doctor, me, that her father had Alzheimer's. And it appeared to me that Mum hadn't even told Dad his diagnosis because his mother, my paternal grandmother, had died of Alzheimer's. And I can remember at the time, Dad swore that he'd throw himself off the gap, that's cliffs at Watson's Bay in Sydney, if he were ever diagnosed himself. So I think Mum was not prepared to call his bluff, neither was I. So we never openly spoke about his diagnosis. We skirted around it. We talked about his memory lapses, but never about dementia. And, he just kept insisting that, well, look, declining memory is a normal part of aging. Between you and me, it's not. And he also swore that he was never going to go into an aged care residence. So I had to keep him as well as possible so that I'd be able to look after him at home. And that's what threw me into learning everything I possibly could about slowing down and even possibly reversing cognitive decline. Because even though I'd been a GP for over 20 years at that stage, I was largely working in the area of women's and reproductive health, and I knew nothing about looking after someone with dementia, and I was horrified at my own ignorance. So basically, I just binged on all the latest research on dementia and applied everything to my father. And I was just so surprised that there was so much information out there that we could not only slow down progression, we could go a long way to preventing the disease. And I'm happy to say I was able to look after him at home for 9 years until he passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 87. That was in March 2019.
Helena, that is an incredible story. What a shocking revelation that you discovered, but a beautiful story that you have taken that experience and really researched in depth, and it has become your life work to help others who might be suffering from early dementia, to help people indeed aim to prevent it. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that story. I guess leading on from that, we know that there is a lot of fear. You've mentioned the stigma that can be associated with dementia, but there is also fear. And so when a daughter discovers that her father has dementia, one of the natural progressions from that is that, well, heck, does that mean that I am at an increased risk? What does that mean for me? And what can I do about it? So to what extent do our genes influence our risk of dementia?
That was one of the first things I looked at for those very reasons. And I found that there are two categories of genes related to Alzheimer's. One category is referred to as deterministic. That means if you inherit the gene, you are guaranteed to get Alzheimer's, but you can nonetheless delay the onset and slow progression through brain healthy choices. And we know of so far only 3 genes in this category. They are presenilin 1, presenilin 2, and amyloid precursor protein. So if either of your parents carries one of these genes, there's a 50% chance that the affected parent will pass the gene on to you. You can have the test, but here's the thing. You will know if one of your parents has this gene because they will have had Alzheimer's prior to the age of 60, 65. With Dad, it was over the age of 75. So I knew he didn't have one of these genes. And fortunately, these genes are very rare and they account for less than 1 to 5% of Alzheimer's cases worldwide. So I could rule that one out. The second category of genes is referred to as risk factor genes. Now, if you inherit a risk factor gene, you are more prone to getting Alzheimer's than someone without the gene, but you're by no means destined to get the disease. The best, and there are a lot of these, over 70, but the best known, and most of them we just don't know how they work, but the best known Alzheimer's risk factor gene is ApoE4. Apolipoprotein E4. If you inherit one copy of this gene from a parent, you have a 2 to 4-fold, more than double the risk of Alzheimer's compared to someone without that gene. If you inherit 2 copies of the ApoE4 gene, you're 8 to 10 times more likely to get Alzheimer's. And in November 2022, actor Chris Hemsworth announced that he was taking a break from acting to reassess his personal priorities because he discovered while filming the documentary Limitless that he had 2 copies of the ApoE4 gene. So if anyone knows Chris Hemsworth, tell him to listen to this podcast and to read my book, Can Adventure Prevent Dementia? Because if he does everything in that book, he won't get, well, he will significantly reduce his chances of getting Alzheimer's despite the fact of having 2 copies of this gene. Because remember, it's not deterministic. It just increases your risk. And people with the ApoE4 gene who adopt lifestyle factors, lifestyle changes, they respond even better in terms of reducing their risk than somebody without the gene. So, and the gene's also affected by your ethnicity, like people who are Nigerian, Hispanic, or Latino. They're much less likely to develop Alzheimer's than E4 carriers of Caucasian or Japanese descent. So a single gene never tells the whole story. A person's risk of Alzheimer's is very much influenced by other genes they've inherited along with the ApoE4. Many people, even with the ApoE4 gene, never develop Alzheimer's because somewhere in their DNA they also carry protective genes or they lead a healthy lifestyle. So the big message I want to get across is genes have on-off switches, or at least dimmer switches, that are influenced by what we eat, how much we exercise, the quality of our sleep, how we manage stress, the toxins we're exposed to, and even what we believe. So our genes do not determine our destiny. ApoE4 carriers who have a positive view of aging do not develop Alzheimer's at a higher rate than non-carriers. This is remarkable. An optimistic view of aging cancels out the increased risk of an ApoE4 gene. And also people with an ApoE4 gene who exercise regularly, daily, they will also bring their risk back down to baseline. But in contrast, if somebody with an ApoE4 gene develops type 2 diabetes, their risk of Alzheimer's skyrockets. So there's lots of mitigating factors. And you can have that gene tested if you want to, but I only recommend you get yourself tested if you're prepared to put in the work, because now you've got less margin for error. You cannot drink alcohol. You cannot smoke, because all those things really skyrocket a person's risk of Alzheimer's if they have the ApoE4.
I'm finding this fascinating, Helena. And what I love is that what you have just shared actually provides a lot of hope for people.
Yes.
So if they've got the genes, if they engage in these interventions in a regular way, they can significantly delay the onset and reduce the severity of that dementia. So I think that is a hugely hopeful message for people. And I agree, when we can test for these diseases, you have to be prepared to take that information on and then do something with it.
Yeah.
It's not worth having that test and then sitting in a bubble of panic and grief necessarily. It is about giving you the information to move forward in a constructive way. Easier said than done, of course. I haven't had that test.
But
I'm not ready to take that test. But I think it's just a really important consideration for people to think about when they do have some of these high-level screens. Yeah.
And I have had people say to me, having this test has actually given them, and this is quite sad, an excuse. I put that in inverted commas. It's finally given me permission to look after myself, because I can say to people, I have to do this, because if I don't look after my health, I'm going to get Alzheimer's. I have a gene that increases my risk. And it's sad that we need an excuse to prioritize our health, but there you go.
Absolutely is. And often people don't get moving on these lifestyle changes until they have a diagnosis. And unfortunately, that's just really the way it is for many of us. But if we can find a reason without having a reason that's a diagnosis, then that's a great idea as well. Let's dive into neuroplasticity. Can you break down this concept for our listeners and share some practical ways that busy professionals can leverage it in their daily lives?
Well, neuroplasticity comes from two words: neuron, meaning brain cell, and plastic, meaning malleable or able to be molded. So neuroplasticity refers to our brain's ability to change its very own structure with each different activity it performs. And that means we can grow new brain cells, known as neurogenesis. We can make new connections between brain cells, known as synaptogenesis. When we learn something new and complex, we can establish whole new brain circuits. We can get more blood flowing to the brain. The brain can even change which cells perform which functions, and this has revolutionized things like stroke treatment. This is really powerful because it can apply to any brain disorder. But let's take stroke as an example. We used to think that if somebody had a stroke and say they paralyzed their left arm, they thought, well, the way to manage that in the past was compensation. You learn to do everything with your right arm if you weren't already doing so. And you learn other ways of doing things that don't involve your left arm. We now know that with specific intense training, rehabilitation, that we can actually get that arm going again, because we can recruit undamaged cells of the brain to take over the lost functions. And it's called constraint-induced therapy. It's the opposite of compensation therapy. You strap up the good side. So you're not allowed to use your right arm. They will actually bandage it up. You have to try and use your left arm. And the other person will go, well, I can't, it's paralyzed. And I go, okay, let's start with something simple. And they might put a glass of water, literally just a few millimeters in front of the fingertips of the paralyzed hand. And they'll say, try and touch the glass. And, they just focus. And visualization also helps. They visualize touching the glass, and they do, because it's only a few millimeters, and they can. And they practice this for several hours a day, every day. Each time they touch the glass, it's pushed further away, and they keep getting harder and harder exercises. And after a few months, they will regain use of that paralyzed limb. And when they scan the brain, what has happened is they've got new nerve fibers have been sent out from new brain cells to take over the lost functions. And that is the essence of neuroplasticity. Use it or lose it, train it and regain it. The sooner after the stroke that you start the rehab, the better. But in general life, if you want to learn something new, if you want to improve your brain function, it's never too early and it's never too late to boost our brain, because the changes that lead to Alzheimer's start in our brain 30 years before we get any symptoms. So if you wait till you're 60 or 70, you haven't totally missed the boat, but you're behind the 8 ball. So start early, to adopt brain healthy practices. And practical ways of leveraging this into our daily lives is, like, first and foremost, to recognize that everything we do, everything we think, everything we eat leaves an imprint on our brain. We can make brain healthy choices every day. And that's what my book, Can Adventure Prevent Dementia, is all about. It offers 80 ways to boost your brain throughout your life. Everything from spending 17 and a half minutes a day in nature, because that's what the studies say is a required amount, 120 minutes in nature a week to keep our brain healthy, to standing on one leg to improve our balance, to doing squats during ad breaks. So there are some things that are simple, some things that are going to be more complicated. But in general, everybody could start somewhere.
I'm actually writing these things down, and I'm thinking I'm going to have to listen to this podcast again because there is so much practical information in it. I'm not capturing it all. I want to listen to it again. I love that you are really going deeply into that. I'm curious about the misconceptions that you encounter in your work. What are the most common myths about brain health and dementia prevention? And how do you address them?
By far, the biggest myths that still abound, and it just so frustrates me, is even among health professionals, that cognitive decline is part and parcel of aging. It is not. Aging is inevitable, but mental decline is not. And the 2024 Lancet Commission, in other words, a team of rigorous scientists, you don't get anything published in the Lancet unless you are top notch. They have identified, and this is conservative, by the way, 14 modifiable risk factors for dementia that, if addressed, could prevent at least 45% of cases. Prevent, as in eliminate nearly half of all cases of dementia. And they include head trauma, so wear helmets, try and avoid falling on your head, high blood pressure, diabetes, low education, untreated depression, visceral obesity, smoking, air pollution, physical inactivity, loneliness, excessive alcohol, untreated hearing loss, oxidized LDL cholesterol, and untreated vision loss. And I'm happy to send you a reference, and you can share that with your listeners and viewers to that paper. In addition to that, even though it's not listed in those 14, we now know that, and this was covered off in Geneva, obstructive sleep apnea, sleep deprivation of any type, poor dental health, noise pollution, like don't live near an airport where you're exposed to aircraft noise all the time. Even loss of meaning and purpose can contribute to cognitive decline. And the good news is these are all things we can work on. And I tell people to start with the easy stuff. Okay, with patients who are starting to worry, I go, okay, get your hearing checked. It isn't hearing loss per se that causes dementia. It's untreated hearing loss. So as long as you get back your capacity to hear and engage with the world, it won't increase your risk. Correct your vision, keep on top of your dental health, because the bacteria causing gum disease called Porphyromonas gingivalis, that bacteria can travel to the brain and release toxins called gingipains that affect our hippocampus, which is our learning and memory warehouse. And when they do autopsies, about 90% of people with Alzheimer's have gingipains and have evidence of this bacteria in their brain. So, look after your teeth. Brush and floss every day. That's an easy one. If you have obstructive sleep apnea, snoring, get that treated, either a CPAP machine or a mandibular device, or again, lifestyle interventions like not drinking, not smoking, shedding excess body fat, cutting down on alcohol. Yeah. So start with the low-hanging fruit, things that you can easily do, and then you build up momentum. So that's the first big myth. And the second big myth is that once you have a diagnosis of dementia, there's nothing we can do, and it's an irreversible downhill slide. I have patients and people I know who have stopped and reversed their Alzheimer's and vascular dementia by changing their lifestyle and addressing all the factors I just listed. The sad thing is, when they go back to their neurologist, they go, oh, maybe you didn't have Alzheimer's in the first place. And it's like, why can't you accept that it is possible to reverse this if you catch it early enough? We don't have to wait for the next big blockbuster drug. We already have so many lifestyle interventions that make a huge difference. We simply need to implement them with enthusiasm and commitment and rally the support around us to keep us on track.
You've just highlighted a really interesting phenomenon, and that is the resistance in some specialist providers in the medical system to lifestyle interventions. We didn't talk about this earlier, but are there any thoughts on how we can move towards acknowledging those lifestyle interventions? Because there is already growing evidence around them, but why is it so pervasive that it must be encapsulated in a pill to be beneficial?
I've been asking myself this question a lot, and I think as a species, we resist change, regardless of what that change is. It's very hard to change old habits. If you're a professor, if you're right up there and have been lecturing or putting out information about, dementia is irreversible, then it's really hard to say, you know what, I got that wrong. It's really hard to admit we're wrong. I don't know. It's just really very hard to get systems to change. And there is a lot of the education for health practitioners, doctors, nurses, dietitians come from the pharmaceutical and the food industry. So they're not going to fund research on lifestyle interventions. They're going to push we're coming up with the latest drug.
It's true. Accepting that we are wrong is always a hard pill to swallow,
hard.
Isn't it? And medicine is always evolving and always changing, and we're learning, and I hope that will change, that we will adopt new information with grace.
We're told on day one of medical school, I remember this because everyone laughs about it and then they forget about it, 50% of what you learn in medical school will be out of date by the time you graduate. Unfortunately, you won't know which 50% is out of date.
That's a great quote.
Yeah.
It is a great quote. And we're all learning. Let's move on. So many people are dealing with high stress environments. And how does that chronic stress impact our brains? And what can we do for stress? What are your top 3 effective stress management techniques?
Well, yes, chronic stress can actually promote the death of neurons. And the mechanism is chronic stress can reduce brain blood supply, known as cerebral hypoperfusion. It can increase inflammation. It can damage the blood-brain barrier, which then allows toxins to enter the brain more readily. And we know that stress stimulates the release of a hormone called corticotrophin release factor, CRF. And CRF, it's like a small protein. It's produced in an area of the brain called the hypothalamus. And there are several ways in which CRF is implicated in Alzheimer's. One is that CRF leads to the release of cortisol from our adrenal glands. Cortisol travels back into the brain via the bloodstream, and it attaches to cells in the hippocampus, which, remember I said, was our learning and memory warehouse, and it makes the cells in the hippocampus more vulnerable to decay. And CRF can also directly bind to cells in the hippocampus, where it triggers the phosphorylation of a protein called tau. And then this creates tau tangles inside our brain cells, which are one of the hallmarks of Alzheimer's. Now, this is such a big thing that scientists are currently working on developing drugs to block CRF from attaching to cells in the hippocampus to prevent the buildup of tau tangles. But until such time, my personal top strategies for effective stress management is, well, firstly, to remind myself that we don't see things as they are. We see things as we are. I can walk into a challenging situation one day and handle it perfectly calmly and effectively. I can walk into the same situation another day and be totally stressed out by it because I had an argument with my husband before I left the house and I nearly had a car accident on the way in. That will put me in a completely different headspace. And I will, my fuse will be short before anything has even happened. I mean, if you want to borrow from Sir Winston Churchill, the pessimist sees the difficulty in every opportunity. The optimist sees the opportunity in every difficulty. And I love this other Mark Twain quote. He says, "I've suffered many tragedies in my life, but only a few of them actually happened." In other words, the stress is caused by what we're telling us about a situation. So the first thing I ask myself, does this really matter? Is this, okay, let's just say I get a parking fine. Okay, I've just been that little bit late and I'm like, oh, come on. Am I going to remember this in a year's time? Probably not. So just deal with it, pay the fine and don't think about it. You know what I mean? I mean, not everything is like that, but just ask yourself, is this something I'm going to remember in a year, a month, a week, a day? Sometimes we just have to let go and choose our battles, so to speak. So, but really, so what I'm trying to say is we can't always change what's going on around us, but we can always influence what's going on inside us. And the 3 things that I find make me far less reactive, and this is supported by research. I mean, I didn't make it up. I adopted it because I read about it. Number 1, I practice gratitude every morning. When I wake up, first thing I do is drive to the gym. And while I drive to the gym, that is my gratitude practice. I mean, look, in an ideal world, I'd have a journal, I'd write everything down. I don't have that time, or haven't made that time, but I find it just as good, that drive to the gym, which is a good 15, 20 minutes, depending on the traffic. I just go through my head everything I feel grateful for. And this really changes the filter through which I see the world. I see more things I feel grateful for throughout the day, but it also gives me a hit of dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin. So I'm just going to be in a better mood, whatever happens. So gratitude is a big one. Secondly, breath work. When I come home from the gym, physical exercise too is a huge stress buster. When I come home from the gym, I then do just 5 minutes of breath work. I used to roll my eyes at breath work and go, yeah, as if. It really, really helps. And what I need to know the why. So it was because I never knew the why. Now that I know why breath work works, it's like I'm not missing my breath work. And it's been found to be even more powerful than mindfulness meditation at improving mood, reducing anxiety, helping people deal with stress. And that's because, number one, mindfulness meditation I find more difficult because I've got to try and, just observe my thoughts and my mind goes racing off. But if I'm doing breathing exercises, and I'll give you some examples in a minute, it gives my brain something to do. And what it is we're controlling something that we're not in the habit of controlling. We don't usually pay any attention to our breath. It's something that happens automatically. But by controlling our breathing, it's sending a subconscious message to our brain that I can control my physiology to an extent. And what breathwork has in common, all the different types, is it stimulates the vagus nerve, which is part of our parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest digest system, which is the opposite of the sympathetic flight fright. So you're activating the opposite of your stress neuronal pathways. So the two that I like the most, one, box breathing. Most people have heard of this. So basically you breathe in for 4 counts slowly, 1, 2, 3, 4, slower than that. You hold for 4 counts, you breathe out for 4 counts, you hold for 4 counts. And I just set my alarm for 5 minutes and I just do that for 5 minutes. Or the one that's been found to be so far the most powerful of all in reducing stress and anxiety and depression is what's known as cyclic sighing. I don't know if you follow Andrew Huberman, but he was one of the lead authors on this paper. Cyclic sighing is where you breathe in as much as you can. So in you breathe, and then when you think you've breathed in as much as you can, you breathe in just that little bit more, which is like the sigh. And then the key to this one is to breathe out as slowly as you possibly can. And I can't tell you how much I enjoy doing that. It is so relaxing. So you breathe in a little bit more, breathe out slowly. That's my preferred one for the morning. Before a presentation, I often just do the box breathing. That kind of works for me. So second was the breath work. And the third thing, which really helps, like nobody argues with this either, spending time in nature. Nature nurtures us and we underestimate how much we need nature for several reasons. No doubt you've heard of the microbiome, the bacteria that live in our gut. Well, there's also an aerobiome, and we need contact with the aerobiome, which is the microorganisms that live out in nature, just floating around, that we breathe in when we spend time in nature. So that's the first reason. And the second thing is when we are near large trees, they produce chemicals called phytoncides, which when we breathe them in, they reduce our blood pressure, they strengthen our immune system, they lower our cortisol levels. And this was made popular by the Japanese forest industry. Have you heard of forest bathing? It was a publicity thing. They wanted to get people into the forest. So they just said, they didn't say it was a health benefit. They just said, come and enjoy our beautiful forests. And so Japanese people started to flock to the forests, and they went back to their doctors and just said, you know what really helps me? I just feel so much better whenever I spend time in nature. And then they started to do formal studies and they thought, wow, there is actually biochemistry in this. So they're my 3 top tips.
Incredible. Practicing gratitude, stacking it with an activity that you're already doing.
Yes.
Which physical activity, which already is very beneficial. Number 2, the breath work, which improves your mood, decreases anxiety, decreases stress, and stimulates the vagus nerve. By doing that breath work, it activates the opposite pathway to which is being activated when we are under stress. And number 3 was spending time in nature.
Yeah.
We come in contact with aerobiomes, which is a new term that I have just learned, and also being near the big trees produces chemicals that decrease our blood pressure and decrease our cortisol. Yeah, Thank you. Thank you. So practical. And really, I do not know of anybody who can't do that, even,
Yes.
whether you are able-bodied, whether you are living with a disability,
That's right.
you are able to incorporate those things into your life. Fantastic. Okay. You have a powerful philosophy of growing bolder rather than older. And I like that phrase. And indeed, one of your books is titled, Can Adventure Prevent Dementia? Are you able to just run us through what that philosophy of growing bolder rather than older actually looks like?
It means having a positive attitude towards aging, seeking out positive role models, continuing to set meaningful goals, and not using your age to limit what you do. It is just so critical that we give, what we really mean by this is, give your brain a reason to stay sharp, and it will. Engage in lifelong active learning. Go to visit places you've never been to before. Get out of your comfort zone and maintain a sense of excitement and joy and appreciation and awe about life. Our culture talks us into getting old is doom and gloom. You go to the island of Okinawa, they're still ploughing the fields in their 90s. They still, as you age in Japan, I was an exchange student in Japan when I was 18 years old for 12 months. And in those days, because it was many decades ago, they still had the extended family living together. And the grandparents and great grandparents were the most revered in the household. They got the first serving of food. They were the first ones in the bathtub, because you all shared the same bath. I mean, you washed down first and then you got to the hot bath. Their opinions and their ideas were sought when the younger people were making decisions. So it's about not treating getting old as becoming frail and irrelevant, but rather still having wisdom and insight and experience and stories to offer, maintaining that sense of meaning and purpose.
I think that that's something that Australians could do better.
Yeah,
It's
very much so.
Celebrating the wisdom and embracing the wisdom and the experience that our elders have.
Yes.
And I look forward to the days when we do that better.
I hate the expression, I'm having a senior moment. If you were young and you forgot something, you'd go, I was distracted, or I had a late night, or you know what I mean? It's just really unhealthy having that kind of self-talk.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And in fact, the self-talk that we give ourselves every day influences our future significantly.
Very much so.
Let's talk about nutrition and gut health.
Mm-hmm.
How do they influence our brain function? And what simple dietary changes would you recommend for optimal cognitive performance?
Food is massively important. I cannot emphasize this enough, and just people do not realize just how much food influences brain health. Number one, the most important thing of all, get off ultra-processed food. Every 1% increase in our consumption of, I'll call it UPF, increases our risk of cancer by 1.2%, increases our risk of type 2 diabetes by 1.5%, and by extension increases our risk of all diseases. So when I say increase, every 1% increase in our consumption, it means as a percentage of our daily calories. Now, when I tell patients this, they often go, oh, that's fine. I don't eat any ultra-processed foods. So I go, okay, just tell me what you have for breakfast. Before even halfway through breakfast, they've had 5 ultra-processed foods and they haven't realized it. So that is the first problem. People don't realize what is ultra-processed food because of the powerful marketing of food companies. My message is, when you buy anything in a packet or a box or a tin, front is fiction, back is fact. In other words, just don't believe a word that's on the front. Just turn the pack over, read what's in the ingredients list, and if there's anything you can't understand, if there are any, this is what constitutes ultra-processed food. Chemicals, emulsifiers, vegetable oils, trans fats, added sugars, artificial sweeteners, colorings, flavorings, preservatives. That is a processed food, and the extent to which it contains these things makes it ultra processed. Look, if it's got more than 5 of them, it's ultra processed. So that means most breakfast cereals, apart from your plain rolled oats, or much better still, steel cut oats, most breakfast cereals are ultra processed foods and sugar bombs. So breakfast cereals off the menu. Most breads in this country are ultra processed. Any dips, mayonnaises, sauces, salad dressings, frozen meals, not to mention the biscuits, the chips, the snack foods, the dessert foods, they are all ultra processed. It's not just a Big Mac and fries. It's not just the takeaway hot dogs. It is the stuff that we are regularly putting in our supermarket trolleys that we don't even realize. So it's ultra processed food in general, but in addition, specifically, get off sugar and refined starches. Now, I want to explain why sugar in and of itself is actually toxic to our brain. Sugar, chemical name sucrose, is made up of 2 smaller sugar molecules called fructose and glucose. And they're metabolized differently in the body. So I'm just going to quickly explain them both. And I think this is really important because otherwise people just go, yeah, sugar makes me, I'm only quitting sugar to lose weight. That is the least important reason to quit sugar. The most important reason is sugar is toxic to our brain. Now, let me just say, it's the dose and the type of sugar that makes it toxic. Nobody got Alzheimer's or diabetes by eating apples, pumpkins, bananas, okay? It's the sugar that is processed, whether it's cane sugar, brown sugar, demerara sugar, coconut sugar, date sugar, palm sugar, I don't care. It's sugar. And once you add it to things, you render them toxic, and the more the worse, obviously. So let's look at the fructose molecule. It enters the brain. It interacts with our genes in our hippocampus and our hypothalamus, and it damages those cells. Metabolizing fructose also impedes communication between brain cells. It leads to a byproduct called uric acid. You do not want uric acid in your brain. You don't want uric acid in your blood because it raises your blood pressure and it causes gout. And worst of all, breaking down fructose actually drains our brain cells of energy. And what is the hallmark of all dementias? A brain that is short on energy. And fructose just makes that even worse. So this is why I say every soft drink is a bullet to our brain, because it is a massive hit of sugar to our brain in a very short amount of time. Now, what about glucose? Glucose, isn't that a prime fuel for the brain? Yes. However, a person with Alzheimer's has lost 20%, usually at least 20% of their ability to use glucose for fuel. So it is operating, our brain is starving. So there's not much point giving it glucose in the first place. Secondly, too much glucose stimulates insulin production. Too much insulin causes insulin resistance, and too much insulin is one of the root causes because of downstream metabolic effects of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, fatty liver disease, and dementia. And the other thing, excess glucose is converted to fructose, so it then causes all the negative effects of fructose. Is this making sense why it's not just about, being on some silly anti-sugar bandwagon? It is the way we metabolize sugar that makes it toxic. Now, why is eating fruit and pumpkin and beetroot not a problem if it's eaten whole, not juiced and not dried? Get rid of the dried fruit. Too much concentrated sugar because you've gotten rid of the water. And fruit juices are not much better. They are a little bit better, but not much better than soft drinks, because you're still getting a huge dose of sugar in a very rapid space of time because you've removed the fiber. So you're no longer slowing the absorption of the fruit. So the reason fruit and vegetables are okay is because they are packaged with fiber, which slows their absorption. Not only slows absorption, but reduces even the amount of carbohydrate you absorb. And also it's packaged with vitamin C and it's packaged with water, which mitigate the harmful effects. So, and the other thing to get rid of is anything that's a refined starch. So bread in this country, I'd get rid of most of it. I make my own, unless you get a really proper sourdough from a baker who uses, where it's really fermented. Because a lot of the, in inverted commas, sourdoughs in supermarkets, they just add vinegar. It's not actually fermented bread. So getting rid of refined starches, pasta, hot chips, any type of chips, anything made with just wheat is usually going to be bad news because it all breaks down into glucose. Now, this is where I have had to apologize to patients. Remember, we said, medicine is constantly changing. The worst advice we ever gave to people was to eat low fat. Eating fat does not make us fat. It does not give us heart disease. It does not raise our blood pressure. It is not unhealthy. Now, there are healthy and unhealthy fats, which I'll break down in a moment. But eating fat is not a problem. Eating sugar makes us fat. Because the excess fructose will be stored as fat when it's broken down by our liver. So get rid of the sugar, refined starches, and reintroduce the healthy fats. Number 1, omega fatty acids. Richest source is your cold water, deep sea, wild fish. Forget farmed salmon, unfortunately. It's got to be wild salmon, sardines, mackerel, anchovies, tuna. What else contains omega-3s? Walnuts are a good source, chia seeds, linseeds, flaxseed oil, dark leafy greens. They are all right up there. Fabulous brain food. Our brain is about 60% fat. DHA, which is a type of omega-3 fatty acids, is absolutely essential for the integrity of our brain. The second healthy fat is your monounsaturated fatty acids, olive oil, avocado, macadamias. So whether it's olives or olive oil, avocados or avocado oil, macadamias or macadamia nut oil, really healthy fats, no arguments there. The third one that's healthy, and this is where the controversy arises, the research is unequivocal. Saturated fats are not unhealthy. So you can, if you're eating grass-fed beef, that's fine. You don't have to chop all the fat off your meat. Butter is not unhealthy. Margarine is toxic. Coconut oil is a really good oil for our brain as well and good to cook with. The fats that are unhealthy, and what I find laughable is when I talk to a lay audience, they all nod their heads. They all know that anything that calls itself a vegetable oil is toxic. And when I tell doctors, they're just totally surprised. What? No, but everyone should be eating swapping out saturated fats for vegetable oils. No, that was the biggest mistake we ever made. And I felt uncomfortable telling patients, sorry, you know how I was telling you, years ago to swap out the butter for margarine? Big fat mistake. It's really hard to admit we were wrong, but we have to. So the oils to avoid are sunflower oil, safflower oil, soybean oil, corn oil, rice bran oil, canola oil. So you're getting the idea. Anything that's extracted from a seed through a series of industrial processes. Now, what's wrong with vegetable oils? Number 1, they are high in omega-6 fatty acids, which are pro-inflammatory. Remember, I always said omega-3s are healthy. They are anti-inflammatory. Omega-6s are pro-inflammatory. We don't need more inflammation in our bodies. We're all too inflamed as it is. Secondly, when you heat these oils, they produce lipid oxidation products such as aldehydes, which are actually carcinogenic. And if you eat out in any fast food place or inexpensive or Asian restaurant, they only cook with vegetable oils. So you're eating carcinogens. I'm sorry. And thirdly, just the way they are produced, they are ultra heated, bleached, deodorized, heated again. They're toxic before you even do anything with them. And the leading cause of lung cancer in China in non-smoking women is inhaling the vegetable oils when they wok fry. So that was a rather long-winded answer, and it was more about taking things out of your diet. But just eat real, whole, unadulterated food. Cook from scratch as much as possible. I don't care whether you're vegan, vegetarian, omnivore, or carnivore, as long as you eat food that is from the land, from the sea, from the sky, or from a tree. Not from a packet, not from a tin. If it comes in a box, I'd throw it in the bin. There's my summary. Of course, it is more nuanced than this, but if in doubt, give the product a miss.
I don't know about you who are listening, but I just feel like I have just had a masterclass in nutrition, actually. I'm aware of a lot of what you just spoke about, but not about the chemical nature of what some of those foods are doing to our bodies and to our brains. And so I really thank you for sharing that. And I will find a way to summarize a lot of what you said, because for some people, it's a lot of new information.
Yes.
Because they're sitting there, I can see it. They're thinking, what? Fat? But I know it's not good if I eat a steak and all that fat on there and, but butter, isn't that bad? And It's a reversal of a lot of
Yes.
the information that we have been delivered over the years, and we've adopted it and we think it to be true because, margarine wasn't mum to be congratulated.
That's right.
All of those things, they're just subtle marketing that has landed on us and we've lived with it for a long time. So I will find a way. I will put it in a blog and you'll be
Great.
able to link to that and to read a summary of that information. Let's look at sleep.
Mhm.
So many people struggle with it. What is the physiological link between sleep and brain function? Any effective tips for optimizing it, especially for people with demanding schedules?
Well, a large European study found that people who had 6 hours sleep or less per night in their 50s and 60s were 30% more likely to develop dementia in their 70s than those who slept 7 or more hours per night. So we must prioritize sleep. We know that if we don't get enough sleep, we're more prone to depression, anxiety, memory problems, overeating, poor performance in mentally and physically demanding tasks. My mother was right when she said, if I want to do well in my exams, the most important thing is to get a good night's sleep. So what's the mechanism? Now, how does chronic lack of sleep lead to Alzheimer's? And the key word is chronic. If you have a toddler, a baby for a year or two or even 5, that's not, and you have broken sleep for a number of years, that's not going to give you Alzheimer's. It's the decades of our life that we just consistently don't get enough sleep. So during the day, our brain accumulates toxic waste products, among them a protein called amyloid, which can stick together and form plaques if we don't remove it. And this is another hallmark of Alzheimer's. So when we fall asleep, this is fascinating. This is only quite, I think in the last 10 years was found out. The brain switches on its waste removal apparatus called the glymphatic system. And the way it works is during sleep, our brain cells, our neurons shrink to open up the spaces between them, and cerebrospinal fluid is then pumped along these spaces to collect waste that has built up between our brain cells. And then the waste products are in turn delivered to our bloodstream via glial cells, supporting cells in the brain, and promptly flushed out. Sleep is also when the brain repairs DNA damage, and lack of sleep contributes to brain inflammation. So all these things come together. If you're not getting enough sleep, your brain just hasn't had enough time to detoxify, to remove all the harmful byproducts that build up. And the other mechanism by which poor or insufficient sleep leads to Alzheimer's is by driving up heart disease, stroke, high blood pressure, depression, type 2 diabetes, obesity, all of which independently bump up our risk of Alzheimer's. Another fascinating study found that 7 consecutive days of sleep deprivation, just 7 days, push our blood sugar levels into the pre-diabetic range. Not to mention that we then feel too tired and unmotivated to engage in physical exercise and other brain healthy habits. So that's one of the first things I tackle with people if their health is poor. Let's just look at sleep first and foremost. What are some tips? I'll just sort of run through my top. I've got the top 7. Go to bed and get up at roughly the same time every day. That assists in programming our brain to fall asleep on cue. Get at least 10 minutes of natural light, preferably sunshine, every day. The earlier in the day, the better. And that helps to regulate our circadian rhythm, which is our sleep-wake cycle. Get at least 10 minutes of exercise every day at whatever level you can manage. If you can fit in more, by all means do so, but even 10 minutes of movement can make a difference. Avoid caffeine after 2 p.m., preferably even earlier, because the half-life of caffeine can be up to 12 hours. And that means you still have half the caffeine in your body that you drank 12 hours earlier. And even people who say, it doesn't bother me, I fall asleep, I've got the good coffee gene, so it means I metabolize it quickly. Even those people experience a reduction in the quality of their sleep after an evening cup of coffee. They don't realize it, but their sleep is more shallow. Another important one people don't realize is keep the bedroom cool, below 19 degrees Celsius. I think that's 67 Fahrenheit if you've got US listeners, because our core body temperature plays a pivotal role in initiating sleep and in keeping us asleep. So a drop in body temperature helps us fall asleep, and a rise in body temperature helps us wake up. And that's one of the reasons people enjoy a hot drink first thing in the morning. It isn't just the caffeine, it's the arousal that's brought on by a rise in our body temperature. Ideally, stop eating 3 hours before bed so that you don't get reflux or heartburn. And also there's a rise in body temperature that accompanies digestion, which we don't want. And sugary foods are particularly notorious in raising our core temperature. And paradoxically, take a hot bath or shower 60 to 90 minutes before bed, because when you get out, your body temperature drops. But if you're a hardcore insomniac, then I would go and look up CBTI, Cognitive Behavioural Therapy for Insomnia. Some GPs are trained in it. You can do online courses. You can see a psychologist. But that is one of the most effective ways if you're an insomniac, whether you can't fall asleep or you wake up through the night. And something else that helps in insomnia is if you're waking up or if you can't fall asleep, think of a pleasant scene in nature. It also tends to help.
Very practical tips. And a lot of them would be familiar, I think, to listeners. But
yeah.
The CBTI, particularly for insomnia, if you really are suffering from insomnia, please check that out, because once you, I guess, like you said, Helena, if people have poor health, put sleep first and foremost, because once you prioritize sleep and get a good night's sleep, you will feel like eating better.
Yep.
You will feel like moving, and things just get easier. Your stress will reduce. You will be able to tackle things that you couldn't before.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, that's really great advice. You have talked a little bit about exercise and that you do it most days. I'd love to hear your thoughts, particularly how it relates to cognitive function. And are there any particular types of exercise when we're thinking about brain health that are better than other types of exercise?
In answer to your last question first, any exercise you enjoy doing, it must be enjoyable. If it's not, you'll produce cortisol, the stress hormone, which will undermine the positive effects of the exercise. And secondly, if you don't like it, you're never going to keep it up. So the best exercise is the exercise you enjoy most and can fit easily into your life. Having said that, in big capital letters, movement is medicine. It's another not nice to have, a must have if we want good brain health, because physical exercise, like if we could bottle it, everybody would be taking it. Physical exercise reduces inflammation. It improves mitochondrial function, and they are the energy producing organelles in our cells, among other things. Exercise helps strengthen and repair the blood-brain barrier. It lowers heart disease, and what's good for the heart is good for the brain. And it stimulates the production of the neurotransmitter BDNF. This stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which promotes neurogenesis, creation of new brain cells, and connections between brain cells. And it improves learning, memory, and cognition. And they found that if you exercise before a cognitively challenging task, if kids exercise before their exam, they get better marks. So it's huge. Everyone knows about the gut-brain connection. I want to emphasize that there is an equally important muscle-brain connection. When we move our muscles, they produce chemicals called myokines, which circulate in our blood and keep all our organs healthy. And we need to engage in 3 types of exercise. Aerobic exercise, which is what everybody knows about, a walk, a run, a skip, a cycle, a jog, a swim. Anything that gets your heart rate up needs to be moderate to vigorous. Moderate means you're breathless enough that you can't sing along to the music, but you can just carry on a conversation. Vigorous means you can't even carry a conversation. If it's moderate, you want to do preferably 25 to 30 minutes a day. If it's vigorous, 15 to 20 minutes. Now, the one that is really, really important is strength training. We don't get weak as we get old. We get old if we allow ourselves to get weak. Next time anyone listening goes to their doctor or physiotherapist or personal trainer or exercise physiologist, test your hand grip strength. I mean, they're easy to do. You just put something in your hand, you squeeze it, and you test the strength of your hand grip. Why is this important? Because it tends to reflect our overall muscle strength. I'm assuming you haven't recently had a hand injury, okay? And your hand grip strength reflects your mental strength. The stronger people's hand grip, the better they perform in tests of memory, complex thinking, planning, decision making. It is remarkable. So it is absolutely essential that we do some form of strength training throughout our life, ideally 20 to 40 minutes 3 times a week. but any amount is better than none, even if it's just 5 minutes here and there with some hand weights at home, or using your own body weight, doing push-ups, doing dips on the couch, doing squats during ad breaks. Google strength training using my own body weight. Thousands of exercises. That is if you can't get to the gym, or, don't want to do a pump class at the gym. So, and there was a study in the US, I think it was called the US Health and Retirement Study, almost 14,000 people aged over 50. And they found that for every 5 kilogram reduction in grip strength, it was associated with an incremental drop in mental functioning. And one of the reasons is that strength training increases insulin sensitivity and stimulates neurotransmitter production. So think, strong muscles equate to a strong mind. And if we don't do any strength training from our mid-30s onwards, we lose 5 to 8% of our muscle mass every decade. That means we can lose a fifth to a quarter of our muscles by the time we're 70. That is huge. So it's not about, looking buff at the gym. Who cares how you look? In my opinion, I strength train to keep my brain in optimal working condition. And the third one is just practicing balance. Stand on one leg for 60 seconds each leg with your eyes closed. Do this while you're waiting in a supermarket queue, because maintaining good balance maintains good mental health. They found that the part of our brain responsible for balance is the cerebellum, which is in the back of our brain. And it also regulates our thoughts and emotions. And people with depression, anxiety, dementia, they have poorer balance. And they found that if you improve their balance, it improves their mental health as well.
Right. So there's a lot of information in there. In summary, we don't get weak if we get old. We get old if we get weak. And 3 areas of exercise to focus on are aerobic exercise, strength training, and balance.
Yep.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. As we wrap up, I'm curious about your vision for the future. What are your concerns for the Australian population in terms of dementia? And could we actually stem the tide if we collectively implemented the steps that you were suggesting?
Absolutely. We can most definitely stem the tide if we implement the strategies in my book, Can Adventure Prevent Dementia? I know I've covered a lot in our conversation, but we've really just scratched the surface. Remember, everything we do impacts our brain, and that's the first thing to be aware of. We have so much more control over our health than we realise. Admittedly, we've created a toxic world. We haven't spoken so much about air and noise pollution, which also contribute to dementia and other diseases. We've created a toxic food environment, which makes it really difficult to even know what constitutes a healthy choice. But if we just keep moving in the right direction, we'll get there. But it does mean being proactive, going against the grain of how most people live, which is stressed out, sleep deprived, eating processed food, and believing that aging means decline. And it's through no fault of their own, but simply being part of our current culture. And remember, don't make being healthy a chore. Make it a joyful, life-affirming adventure. Make sure there is laughter and smiling and connection with, social connections are also absolutely critical to a healthy life. So I recommend people subscribe to my weekly blog, which I call Healthy Bites, because I will send you a brain booster every week. It's everything from stimulating your sense of smell, because that's been found to be a really important one, to all the nuances about food and exercise and nature and all the other things we've talked about. I've also just go to my website, either drhelenapopovic.com or adventurepreventsdementia.com. There are hundreds of videos, radio interviews, other podcasts I've been interviewed on, and of course, read my books. But there's just so much there, so much information there. As you can see from what we've covered in just an hour, I've got hundreds of hours of information and free downloads that will guide you and keep you on track, because that is what I'm just so passionate about.
The passion is absolutely evident. I have absolutely loved this conversation with you, Helena. There is a gamut of, gems in there of wisdom, of practical tips that everybody can incorporate into their life. I encourage everybody to listen to this episode twice, because there was so much information listed in here. Thank you again so much, Helena. It has been an absolute pleasure and an honour to interview you and to learn from you. So thank you.
Likewise, it's been a pleasure and an honour meeting you and speaking to you. It's been terrific, and keep up what you're doing because it is so important to get this information out there.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, I can't tell you how grateful I am that you have tuned in and listened to the full hour of this episode with Helena. There was so much information in there, and I think, well done you for listening and learning more about how you can prevent dementia for yourself and for your loved ones. If you're still on the borderline, I guess, and you know that you need to make some changes in your life to improve your health, but you don't really have that compelling reason why, if prevention of dementia is not enough for you, I have written out 100 reasons taken from other people's reasons of what drives them to make change in their life. So feel free, download that PDF. I will put the link in the show notes. It just might give you a spark of an idea and inspiration to help you just get to that point of knowing that, right, this is it. This is what drives me. Even when it gets tough, I'm going to just move forward with slowly making changes in my life towards improving my health. So thank you again for listening. Just a quick disclaimer as well. Obviously, everything in this podcast and all of the Wellness Nurse podcasts is for general information only. It's not for individual advice. Always seek the guidance of your GP or other professional health practitioners. And take care of yourselves. All right. Until next time, see you then.